I'm Azlin from the Argus editorial team. There have been quite interesting happenings in the oil markets this year, including the addition of US WTI into the Dated Brent benchmark, Saudi Arabia's output cut policy, and the uncertain outlook on Chinese oil demand. In this episode of Crude Insights, we spoke to Argus experts at the Argus Asia Pacific Oil Markets Forum to get their thoughts on these topics. And with me today is Carl Kleemeyer, who is head of Argus in Asia. So Carl, we have a question for you on OPEC+. How do you think the OPEC+ production cuts have had an impact on crude prices, particularly for Middle East crude, which is a staple of Asia Pacific refining?
Well, Aslan, the Middle East is really the marginal barrel for OPEC. And their crudes tend to be more heavy and more sour. And that has really affected the flows into Asia, which is the primary market for those barrels. So that has really cut this heavy sour bit out and really squeezed in the light heavy spreads in Asia. So we've seen Dubai actually come up near right around Brent. Murban as well has gone well above Brent unusually. So it's really squeezed all that, and it's also allowed the Middle East producers to really push their OSPs and actually above market really, because they've cut back on their supply, but the demand remains because of their term agreements with the Asian customers.
Can you tell us how the OSPs what the BUs have done with the OSPs?
Well, really, you've got a couple of big things. First of all, you take like the Saudi Aramco has actually been able to push their AL OSP well above the Dubai time structure, which it typically follows. It's been the last several months, it's been $2 or so above that. We've seen similar things for Upper Zakum. The other thing we've seen is with Aramco, their lightest grade, Arab Extra Light, now prices under Arab Medium, Arab Light, and as well as Arab Medium, has done that for the last few months, which is really unprecedented in a period of normal supply and demand.
With me today is David Feiss, Chief Economist of Argus Media. So David, two questions to ask. What are the key risks facing the global economy for 2024, and how do you think this might affect oil demand?
Hi Aslan, great to see you. I think the factors that have been running through 2023 really are going to spill over into the early part of next year. We've got high interest rates in the Atlantic Basin. We've got inflation still at play, so there's a real risk that the advanced economies dip into recession end of the year, first quarter of next year. The big hope for much of this year was that China and the emerging markets could help counterbalance the slowdown in the Atlantic Basin. Of course, as we know, China has been a bit slower than people expected to spring back to life, economically speaking. So I think really the key macro risk running through, at least through the first half of next year, is going to be the extent to which China recovers and commodity demand picks up there correspondingly.
So, in light of this, how do you see the OPEC plus strategy going into 2024, just in light of how the group has performed over the past year?
I mean, I think OPEC plus is probably pretty satisfied with the way they've managed to oversee the market in 2023. They've had a pretty high degree of cohesion. They're producing now probably 2 million barrels a day less than they were producing in the second half of last year. So they've been pretty coordinated. I think they're going to need to continue with that through 2024. They've said they will continue to restrain supplies next year. The big question is if some of the Middle East producers start to see more Russian oil seeping into the Asia-Pacific market, which really is the Middle East producers' key market, whether a degree of competition creeps back in between members. We've got to wait and see.
With me today is James Gooder, who is Vice President of Crude. So James, Asian market participants use the Brent benchmark for a lot of crude purchases, but this benchmark has undergone the biggest change in its history this year with the addition of WTI into the pricing basket. What has the impact been, and what does this mean for Asian buyers?
Good question, Aslan. Well, the Brent benchmark has been the most important benchmark in the world for several decades now, and it's used here in Asia. And people know what it represents, which is the price of North Sea crude, whether it's exported to Europe or to Asia, anywhere in the world. But now, with WTI delivered into Europe in that benchmark, it represents something different. It's a delivered price. It's really a kind of a European refining price. So as a result of that, and because the cheapest grade in that basket sets the price, and WTI is so much volume coming into Europe right now, that it usually is the cheapest in the basket. So not only does it reflect a European refining price, it's also cheaper than it would be otherwise. So Brent is a little bit lower than it would be otherwise, and it also represents something very local for Europe. So what we're hearing is that more and more people are using the WTI price at the US Gulf Coast as part of their price discovery in order to understand the real outright price of crude, and then in Asia, trading the spread between that and a price like Dubai or Melbourne or something more relevant in this hemisphere.
With me today is Matthew Otway, who is the head of North America for Argus Media. So, Matt, US WTI has always been the pricing benchmark for US crude traded within the domestic market and to some extent, US crude that is exported. But WTI has obviously become more significant in the global crude market with its addition into the Dated Brent benchmark. So, which WTI prices should Asian refiners be looking at to better understand market economics and why?
Well, one of the great things about U.S. crude markets are that there are multiple liquid and transparent markets with risk management mechanisms all along the supply chain, from the upstream gathering hub of Midland to the refining, storage, and export hub of Houston to an increasingly vibrant Aframax market on the U.S. Gulf Coast. For global market participants, WTI Houston is first among these. It represents the point of greatest optionality, where sellers of crude can sell into storage, into the domestic refining system, or across the dock into the export market. And it provides a precise hedging tool that connects the deep liquidity of the NYMEX Cushing market with a value that's precise, prompt, reflects the right quality, and in the right location. So WTI Houston is really where international market participants are putting their focus.
So, do you expect oil companies in Europe and in Asia to start looking more closely at the US crude markets and at the Argus WTI crude assessments as they continue to take Dated Brent-linked crude cargoes?
Certainly. Since the inclusion of Midland quality cargoes into the Dated Brent complex, WTI Houston and the Argus assessments at the US Gulf Coast has become even more important. For European refiners, it's really a matter of understanding how will those Midland exports impact the Dated Brent market and potentially experimenting with linking their imports of WTI crude to a direct WTI index and market. In Asia, it's really a question of the west to east arb. If Brent is a freight-based derivative of WTI, and if WTI is forming a baseload of crude going to Asia, isn't a WTI Houston to Dubai or WTI Houston to Melbourne spread a more reflective value of the west to east arb? That's the question a lot of Asian companies are asking us right now.
With me today is Tom Reed, who is Vice President of China Crude and Products for Argus Media. So Tom, let's talk about China. How do you see China oil demand for the rest of this year and in 2024?
Well, we have Chinese oil demand growing by around 900,000 barrels a day this year. Clearly, it's been growing faster than that. And I think we certainly see it slowing in the last few months of this year, probably taking the form of higher product exports, simply because, there's a massive contraction going on in the real estate market, which has historically been the main driver of oil demand growth in China. So I think that's probably almost certain to happen, and we saw a new batch of product export quotas just being released. Looking ahead to next year, I think, oil demand will certainly grow at a slower pace. If we see, GDP grows at 4.5%, which I think is what the IMF has currently, then oil demand would probably grow on historical trends by around sort of 700 kbd. Whether that will in fact be the case, I think is highly debatable because, of course, all of our demand modeling has been predicated on continued expansion in the real estate market, and that is no longer a given.
So, China has actually become quite a swing buyer in the grey crude market. So, do you think that China's consumption of Russian and Iranian crude in particular could continue to grow in the next 6 months to a year?
I think certainly. I mean, right, everyone's bargain hunting in China right now, not least because, of course, formula prices from those, strategically important Middle Eastern producers like Saudi Arabia have been set so high. So they're looking for cheaper barrels, and that has taken the form of Iranian crude, it has taken the form of Russian crude. To the extent that they are able to, I think they would certainly like to expand imports of those cheaper grades. And I think they're likely to see higher imports from Iran because China's the only market for Iranian crude, right? Whether that is the case with Russia, I think is more debatable because, of course, China faces stiff competition from India and Indian refiners, because Indian refining margins are stronger than those in China, can probably afford to outbid Chinese refiners for Russian crude.
Thank you for watching. If you have any questions about any of the topics that were covered today, please contact your local Argus representative.